Since it's almost year 3, I believe this is episode 52. The last episode of year 2. I think we should kind of return to last year's look at a monster game. Last year I had Crush, Crumble and Chomp. And this year I'm going to talk about Rampage for the Commodore 64.
RetroKork.
Rampage is a classic arcade game, originally by Bally Midway, or Bally Midway. It's a callback to the classic B-movies, as you can play George, who turned into a giant ape, kind of King Kong. Lizzie, the only female, who turned into a giant lizard, and Ralph, who turned into... no, not a snail. Oh, God. Why do I write Owen Citizen references? Seriously, they've turned stale already. No, Ralph is a giant wolf. You're on a rampage, of course, as the title suggests, to destroy various cities in the United States of America. Crushing windows, hitting the other monsters, and, well, kill or eat all people. Of course, the world at large and the United States especially don't take this lightly, so they send someone to oppose you. The National Guard, of course. And you can get hit in various ways, including but not limited to being hit by a National Guardsman, being hit by another monster, falling from buildings, or eating something bad. On the other hand, health can be replenished by eating nourishments like food. The game in the arcade is very colorful and, well, it has quite a lot of levels. But what about the Commodore 64 conversion? That's where the tragic part begins. First of all, there have been 2 releases, one for the US, one for Europe. Now, first off, I'm going to talk about the European version primarily, because I had a Commodore, my dad had a Commodore 64, that was a PAL one. As I'm from Germany, which is part of Europe, the US TV mode, NTSC, uses a lot more frames per second, 29.97, I believe is the state usually rounded up to 30. PAL, however, uses only 25 frames per second. So that's why games imported from Europe run a little too fast and tend to corrupt more easily than games from the US do in European consoles, European computers, because they just run a bit too slow. Anyway, the Commodore 64 version is merely a shadow of the arcade experience. Much flockier. Yes, that is a word, thank you very much. Characters with barely any difference visually speaking, aside from colors. The third player has, fortunately, to use the keyboard because Commodore 64 computers only had 2 joystick ports, and well, I find the controls to be pretty stiff. Don't know about you. In fact, I never managed to beat the level 1, which, by the way, you beat the level by crumbling the entire block of buildings to the ground. And according to the internet, the European version is, well, it's buggy as a buggy game, I presume. The US version, on the other hand, is, in my personal opinion only, of course, a whole lot better. Most of the bugs have been addressed, you regain health. The controls feel a little more fluid. And yes, I admit it's uglier with its 2D cardboard cutout buildings. Yet it just seems, it just feels a lot easier to play and to potentially proceed. If I have to recommend a version to play from my personal perspective, and I have to admit I never played any of the home ports besides the Commodore 64 one, so my view is kind of skewed. It would be the arcade original. If you don't want to hunt down the arcade version in an arcade, well, you might be interested in a few more recent ports of this game, and maybe the sequels. So yeah, Rampage was part of a few more modern compilation titles, namely Arcade Game Pack for the PlayStation 1, Midway Arcade Treasures for Xbox, PlayStation 2 and GameCube, and it is allegedly part of the Midway iOS app for the iPhone. Also, it's included in Rampage Total Destruction for GameCube, PlayStation 2, and even the Nintendo Wii. As a sequel, we do have Rampage World Tour, which gives you the Infernal Trio the entire world to destroy. That one originally was an arcade title as well, but it wasn't ported to the Commodore 64. So, sorry, can't tell you that I find it as much fun as the original, at least the arcade version. This game was released on the original PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, Nintendo 64, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Color, and the Windows PCs. According to Wikipedia, where I started most of my research, it's also available on PlayStation Network, and it is part of Midway Arcade Treasures 2 for PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube. Oh, and it's in Rampage Total Destruction 2 as well. Then there was the home console sequel, Rampage 2 Universal Tour for PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and Game Boy Color, expanding the boundaries of the game world to the whole universe, including alien planets. And then there's Rampage Through Time, which was a PlayStation 1 exclusive, and it takes the monsters through past times of Earth, really just messing up our timelines. And the final time we heard Rampage was the aforementioned Rampage Total Destruction for GameCube, PlayStation 2 and Wii. While it's visually speaking a 3D game, the gameplay seems to be the same. And now a personal note, I don't know who owns the trademark on Rampage. My best guess would be, say, Warner Brothers, WB Games. So, maybe one day someone, who knows, maybe even NetherRealm Studios, may breathe new life into Lizzie, George, and Rolf. It would be nice to see them. Oh, okay. Next up, seriously, possible mission 2. And yes, you're still fighting Elven Adamant. I don't know either.